Great day, family and friends. Welcome back to another live episode of Dr. Wilson Speaks. I will remind you that we do have a podcast under Dr. Wilson Speaks, rather. So I would really encourage you to please log in and check out the podcast where we talk about an array of subjects that's happening to us as we live this one life that we've been given. But I will come to tell you that I am really excited about tonight's topic, where it speaks and it talks directly to us. And a topic that we're going to talk about is the African American community, or as we call ourselves, Black, however you want to look at it, and the victimization mentality. Oftentimes, this subject has come up in conversation of whether we take the victim stance or not, and what is our mentality when it comes to playing the victim. One of the things I really want to remind you of tonight is that when we talk about these subjects, it's not meant to be controversial. It's not meant to ensue argument. But what it is designed to do is to encourage us to think, encourage us to analyze our lives, encourage us to evaluate so that we can make better decisions as we move forward. I oftentimes use the analogy we use in church. If it hits or if it hurts, just say, ouch, pray for yourself and move on. But the goal is to walk away with something that improves your life or makes it better. I'm excited for our panel tonight that's going to help me into talking about this subject, the victim mentality as it relates to the African American community. I would like to welcome to the stage my frat brother, my friend, Dr. Headley White, who is a professor in his own right. Dr. White, if you will go ahead and give a brief introduction of yourself.
Good evening. How's everybody doing? My name is Headley White. I'm associate professor at the great Bethune-Cookman University in the School of Education. And that's brief.
That's as brief as it comes, huh?
As brief as it comes.
All right. We are glad for Dr. Headley White to be here to shed some light on this subject, especially from an educational background. Next, I'd like to welcome to the stage another friend, another brother, a historian in his own right, Dr. Anthony Dixon. Dr. Dixon, go ahead and introduce yourself to our viewers.
All right. Good evening. My name is Dr. Anthony Dixon. I'm a public historian, author, and lecturer, and president of the Archival and Historical Research Associates.
Awesome. And we're glad to have you here. There will be another panelist that will be joining us briefly, Dr. Earl Mowat, who is a sociologist, has been a professor. Matter of fact, all of the panelists, we taught together while working at the great Bethune-Cookman University, my alma mater. So we're going to try to facilitate this conversation with fidelity tonight in hopes, again, that we are encouraging individuals to examine, to evaluate themselves. So if you find that there is something that we've spoken on, something that we've talked about, and you want to chime in, please do chime in so we can read your comments and we can add you to the conversation. I'm glad that my friend, my brother, Dr. Earl Mowat has joined us. Brother Mowat, go ahead and give a brief introduction of yourself, sir.
Oh, thank you.
I think we lost Brother Mowat, Dr. Mowat. We'll get him back in here while the technology team works with him. So we will work with getting Dr. Mowat back in here. So we'll go ahead and get this subject started where we talk about the victim mentality. So I want to open up this discussion where we are talking about, is there even a such thing as the victim mentality? And the follow-up question as we prepare for it is, how did we get here? So let's just jump right in and talk about, what is the victim mentality? What do you perceive that to be? Don't be scared. Just go ahead and jump in.
When I hear those words, those are, those code words. And I think to me, there is so many things, and I think Dr. Dixon will probably agree. There are so many things historically that aren't being answered for. So when the conversation becomes uncomfortable for some, that is one of the code words that they use: the victim mentality. If you're talking about whether it be socioeconomic, whether you even talking about the fact that many of us have signs of PTSD, even if we were blessed enough to grow up in a stable household because of the way society is structured. So when I hear that, I mean, there are moments where, and they're more brief than they are than people are led to believe. But there are moments where people do and say things where they're wrong, and then they try to use the victimization as the reason that they do it. The famous "because I'm black," and like, no, because you robbed the store. But for the holistic argument and conversation, there's so many facets to it that it's not just so general.
Mm-hmm.
So I would think that. Would you agree with that, Dr. Dixon?
Yes, I would. And if I could, I'm going to kind of give a historical perspective on how it kind of developed. It really started with the abolitionist movement, and white abolitionists, particularly the leader, William Lloyd Garrison, they wanted to appeal to whites and their sense of morality. And so they wanted to project this idea of the downtrodden black, or at that time, of course, the downtrodden Negro. And so they wanted to project, this idea that would enhance and give whites this sense of pity on blacks, and that would appeal to their morality. And so we see, though, even back then, there was pushback for that type of ideology with Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was in opposition to that idea. He believed that he should present himself, and blacks should present themselves as strong, dependable people and dependable citizens, and show that this is what we could be if you simply give us a chance and give us the same opportunities and equality that you give yourself. And so that whole idea of feeling sorry, quote unquote, feeling sorry for blacks kind of developed then. And then when we fast forward to the civil rights movement, there was again this push to try to move toward getting whites to feel a sense of morality. And so here again, those ideas, right, started perpetuating again about feeling sorry for blacks. And let's call it like it is, the civil rights movement kind of enhanced those ideas, because the movement in itself was nonviolent and it was passive. And so that whole overall passive stance kind of made people go into this idea. And when I say people, I mean the majority of the people in America, and specifically white people, started getting these ideas of, quote unquote, having pity on blacks. Now, the problem, as I see it, was that because we had used that and it worked to a certain extent, blacks began to use that, and we began to kind of get in that mode a little bit as well, to be honest.
So it sounds like to me, we've lost ourselves in this.
Right, in that idea where it started out as we're trying to get whites to feel a sense of morality. And in doing so, instead of getting empathy, we ended up getting sympathy.
Mm.
And so that sympathy then translated itself into this whole idea of victimization.
Well,
And so I think that we got caught in that mode, so to speak, for another period of years, because let's call it like it is, they still continue to do things to leave us in economic, political, and social injustices.
But now we're 20 years later, and in 2023 here, and you know, we are still here in the same facet talking about the same thing, you know, and I'm looking to myself saying, when do, because I can't generalize it and say everybody is doing this, you know, everybody is feeling a sense of victimization, but when do we as a people, we get over this, if this is this thing that we're feeling? Go ahead and jump in, Dr. Mowat. I see your mind turning.
Well,
Oh man.
We lost him again.
We lost him. He'll come back. But go ahead and jump in. I mean, you fast forward to where we are now, and we're in this place where people are just continuously feeling sorry for themselves. They're not trying. I guess it's easier to take the victim stance than it is to overcome it and do something about it.
I mean, that is an interesting way to look at it. I think what has happened is, it is my opinion, I think what has happened is, because we have instant access to everything, that we can see the inner workings of the entire society in real time. And I think that shows a problem. I think that some people, you know, you have the people that will be the Frederick Douglasses. You'll have because even when Dr. Dixon was talking about it, it was almost, when he was talking about Frederick Douglass, there's almost that sense of accommodationalism, where we'll just be us and we'll be strong and we'll be there. And looking from that standpoint of people that grew up in slavery, which is something that we, you know, in the 21st century cannot fathom. I don't care how, you know, knowledgeable you are about that period. We did not. We have our own issues, yes. I think that's a survival instinct. I think that a lot of people, depending on what they have gone through, their way to protect their self-being is to just say it's always been like this, and it's because I'm Black or I'm this, and you know, it's just like the memes that you see during election time. Like, why should I be involved in the process? And they'll show a picture of a neighborhood, and this is what it looked like before so and so was elected, and this is what it looks like after so and so, and it's the same picture. So they're like, you know, it doesn't matter what I do, because nothing is going to change. Because, you know, if you break somebody, right? If you break their spirit, that's what you get. It's not everyone, but I think that there's a big chunk of that, and I think as Dr. Dixon alluded to, especially with the socioeconomic piece, there have been, I mean, so many stumbling blocks put in place to make sure that we weren't as successful as we could be. And it's a miracle that people are as successful as they are. Because, I mean, you know, if you're talking about redlining, if you're talking about the lack of educational accessibility, and then anytime that we make any kind of progress, they change the rules of the game. College used to be affordable, right? And college was subsidized by the government, and it was seen as a public good until too many of the wrong public started getting the education. Then it was, no, that's not going to work. We have to change that. And if going back to what Dr. Dixon said as well, if anything, with the modern civil rights movement and even the abolitionist movement, when you get that sense of downtroddenness, white people can say, well, we gave, and that's a lot of that. You know, when you hear them talking about victimization, whatever, they say, we gave you this. We gave you, Lincoln freed the slaves. we gave you the voting right. It's something that could be in their mind given and taken back, which is a dangerous precedent. But that's the operative condition that this country is in when it comes to marginalized and historically oppressed people. It's like, we gave you this. It's not altruism. It's just, they're being benevolent, right? And they see themselves as being benevolent, but they're not.
You're making me think if people do actually feel that way, like something is given to me, so therefore something can be taken away from me. Is your mic on, Dr. Moat?
Yeah, it is. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, wow. I love the points that Dr. White and Dr. Dixon is making. But before I even jump in, let's talk about this white sympathy business, right? White sympathy is a problem that we need to address. Why? Because it affects how, let's talk about educators, white educators perceive Black students, right? So now here's the problem. Because the sympathy based, and it's false, because Black students are just as brilliant, if not more brilliant, than their white counterparts, but they are treated marginally because white faculty and educators tend to think that the Black students can't perform as well as the white students. What do? They lower the standards for the Black students, right? This happens across the board. Statistics show this. These things are published, but nobody's doing anything with this. So they're not addressing it in terms of education, how instructors interact with kids, the students, Black students, but this is across the board. So we get kind of like a less than, or the standards are low for us, right? So that's one thing about sympathy. But going to the victimization, we are victims. Let's just make that clear, right? We are victims of systemic inequality, and a manifestation of that is learned helplessness. Piggybacking on what Dr. White and Dr. Dixon is saying, right? Look, if I feel that my voice doesn't count, I'm not heard, I'm not seen, well, then I'm going to perceive myself as a victim. And as long as I perceive myself as that, there is no motivation for me to even want to do something, because it'll always fall back on that. So now my self-efficacy is down, right? It's reactionary. So we have to think about that, right? We have to reorient the way how we think and know that we do matter. We have to coalesce with each other and understand that, because that learned helplessness is real. Learned helplessness basically is just that, you see that you can't gain traction because, a lot of times it is race-based. It is because we are victims. So then we just give up. We give up. And because of that, then it happens. And the last point I want to make too is we have to be careful of that, because it's so easy to blame others, right? Because we don't see, as long as we could blame something, that's something to fall back on, right? So now it lowers the efficacy, self-efficacy, because now we don't have to try, because as far as we know, the blame is on them. No matter what we do, nothing can happen. So I'll pivot back to you, Dr. Wilson. Those are some points.
Well, I think you bring up a good point when we talk about the blame. How do we move forward? We're here. You've all pointed out that there's a historical context that goes along with it. We're here. We're here today. And yet we still use this as a crutch. We're still talking about it. We still use it as an excuse. Is this something that we are able to get over, or to move beyond? I'm not going to say get over, to move beyond, to become successful in our own right? Or are some people just stuck in this ever evolving circle that they can't get out of because they've been preconditioned to think that I just have to blame someone else and that things are never going to work in my favor? I might as well stop trying. I might as well not even be optimistic that things will change. How do we move? How do we get people to even do some self-analyzation and even try to move beyond this?
Very serious factor in that. There's a very serious factor in that. And that factor, Dr. Moet just hit on, is the idea of motivation, right? That we aren't motivated. And that's the thing that we have to take care of within our own society. We have to stop being so reactionary and start motivating ourselves to be looking forward and looking at these things years to come. These things that are happening to us, DeSantis didn't just pop up. These things that DeSantis is doing now, they actually started years ago. And I'll use the most recent example. This whole thing about Black history, right? They began doing this years ago, right here in the state of Florida with the African American History Task Force. When they put the task force together, they never put in it, just like the way we had to go back and look at the Voting Rights Act and everything else. They put these things in place, but they don't put in a bark with the bite, right? In other words, these rules are there on paper, but they can't be enforced. And so we were just so happy that they were on paper that we never looked to the nits and grits of it to see that it wasn't enforced. So the African American Task Force has been doing the work, and it has had the curriculum in place and all of that, but there was no bar. There was nothing for the local county school system to say, no, we're going to reject it. And that's exactly what they did. So here it is, years later, we've had this African American history curriculum in the state of Florida for years now, but only 11 counties out of 67 actually adhere. And so now we got to be reactionary again and go back and make them put some bite in the bark, so to speak, right? And make them do something to make sure that these local school boards actually implement and do things to implement the curriculum. We're being reactionary yet again. And
Is
so
that further setting our people back?
It goes back to that whole thing that Dr. Mawat alluded to, that when you feel downtrodden and you start taking on that victimization ideology, you continue to be reactive as well, because you don't start thinking forward, because you don't think that these things are actually going to manifest. But we have to now. We are years away, years now, not eons, not hundreds of years, we are years away from the point where there will be more minorities than whites. And we must start preparing for that now. Because if we don't, we're going to be in the closest thing to apartheid as you can get, if not in it.
And I think that, was it, I think 2 years ago, where they said at this point in Florida that most of the students coming in now, it's going to be all minority over majority, all the students in public schools. So that was third grade on. So they had gotten to the point where they're either Hispanic or Black or other, but they're not going to be the white majority. And I think this is a reaction to it. And you talked about learned helplessness, but think about it. Our whole agenda, and I'm just talking about the overarching, the whole agenda is this: when we go to school, with the little bit of history that we get, we're told that the civil rights movement ended in 1968, and that's just like a rubber stamp, and everybody says that. No, Martin Luther King was killed. He was assassinated in 1968. We're still, there are still leaders and leadership, not the ones that they might put in front of you, but there are other people who are doing things all across this country to try to, as Dr. Dixon said, to try to force, and you have to be reactionary, I guess, to try to force these people to give us what was promised. And some people don't have the tools for that, right? So what they do is they just give up. It's hard. And to be honest, because it would be almost elitist to act like even people who have the capacity, the intellectual capacity, the economic capacity, all of that, they still, they feel that pressure. And sometimes human beings can only take so much before you reach a breaking point. And sometimes you have to you have to rest and refocus. So, if you don't have anything to start with, and I'm just saying, like, economically, then that becomes an issue. And then that is that learned helplessness. That's why you have, you know, when gentrification came to Miami, and other places in Florida, and you had people that were living in public housing, and you know, they had said they were going to tear them down and do whatever, but they were acting like those were their homes. And we're like, you know, people, they basically told you it's not your home. They had no plan. They knew that it was coming, and then they were just stuck. And then they gave them vouchers. They moved them, like in Miami, of course, they moved them to North Miami, changed the entire demographic of North Miami. And then you have more problems because they can't afford to live there, right? And so you have all of these issues. And I think that another thing is in our community, we have this false sense of that we need to, that we, you know, that everybody, I should say, everybody else is monolithic. They're not. There's a plethora of ideas in every community. It's just that what we see is the more successful, and we cannot, and I think that's the danger. Because it's that comparison, it's a false comparison. Because we're like, oh, you know, you hear it all the time, like, oh, you know, white people do this and they're all together. No, they're not. It's just that they have that privilege, and they are in a space that we're not. So we have to work together and do whatever. And you don't have to agree with everything as a people, because we don't, you know, we're individuals. But I think that's part of the problem, and it's getting people to understand what has happened, like as Dr. Moore said, that learned helplessness, and how do you get out of that learned helplessness? It's just like the fact that Black people don't like to go to therapy, and that's part of it too. That victimization, that you have to realize what makes you tick, what makes you sad, what do we need to do to make you be the best you that you can be under the circumstances and move forward. And we don't do that. We have the church for that, but many of the church answers are simplistic, and then they, in many ways, they make you feel guilty. You're not praying hard enough. You're not reaching out to God hard enough. And you don't know that people are praying, but they still need a sounding board. They need somebody that actually can tell them, hey, this is what's wrong. Yeah. You know, I'm gonna tell you, when I actually sought therapy, and they were like, you know, you have PTSD. And I was like, what? And broke it down. You know, the anxiety, because you're sitting around with all these ideas in your head. And I know we all probably in that same space where you know all this historical content, and you can see, you're sitting in your mind, you can connect all these dots, and you're looking at other people like as you said, Dr. Dixon, we're years away, and people are still worrying about putting money up to their ear on social media. What do you do? And that'll drive you crazy. Yeah. You know, intellectually. So I mean, that's part of it too. That's the other side of the because we always think about the downtrodden or the poor, but it's across the board. Mm-hmm. There's a facet of that across the board.
I have a thought here, right? So, all right, by 2050, the minority is going to be the majority, right? And in the case of Florida, it's going to be happen way before 2050, right? But the thing about it is that you can be the majority, but still what's going to eclipse that is a dominant ideology. So these white males, 50 and up, they will always be able to eclipse whatever movement. So here's the irony, the colossal irony of all of this is the movement they're having now is, even though it is politicized, is because guess what? They feel like they are victimized. They are. So that's the terrible irony behind all this, right? Is that they feel like they are the victims. So, but what is it that they're doing, right? They are coalescing, they're mobilizing and galvanizing, and they are wiping away our history because they feel threatened by this, right? Because that threatening also, you know, leads into feeling that whole victimization thing. Well, you know what? Let's pull a sheet out of their book and figure out what they're doing, and let's do it within our community, right? Mm-hmm. And then, you know, we can see change. But again, we have issues mobilizing, galvanizing, and coalescing within our own groups. We've done that, Brother Wilson. You and I, we've done programs with Alpha Phi Alpha, trying to get folks to vote. If you can recall, when I was at Cookman, so we got them to there for the entertainment, right? But then when we even tried to get them on the buses to vote, right, it just went to a standstill. We couldn't get them there, right? So we have to change that mindset. The psychology of being stuck is simply this. We don't know who we are really, right? When I say that is that we always see ourselves in the best possible light. It's called a self-serving bias. So we never see our deficiencies. It's hard for us to see it, right? And if we do that, we always see them as the vices and us as the virtues, right? So that doesn't give us the motivation we need. Again, it goes back to blaming them. We're the good ones. We're the virtuous ones, right? They're the bad ones. But we can't see that with internally that we need to actually mobilize ourselves because we're always blaming them. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So as long as that, and that is a hard barrier to overcome. We have to be very introspective in what we're doing, how we're going about this, right? That means we have to work. I believe the solution here is that we have to work within our communities incrementally and then hopefully scoop people into that fold to create change. We can't do it a big umbrella net and scoop people up. We have to do it in small groups incrementally and let that spread out and then get people to act.
I agree with you. And I tend to think that we're victims in our own mind because as you all have said, you know, I look at it as when something happens within our community, let's take something like police brutality. We see the issues that are going on with police killing young Black men. We'll get out there and we'll hold a sign. We'll march. We'll scream to the top of our lungs to talk about how other people are doing us. But what I've learned is nothing goes beyond that. Then we step back, and here's the statement that we say to ourselves: nothing is going to change anyway. And so it stops right there. You know, so I think that, you know, as you said, Dr. Mowat, we can get the people to come out when we have prizes and gifts, but then to make the tangible change, it doesn't happen because we can't get them beyond, am I getting something for showing up?
So I just have to say this because you've heard my I've reached out to you whether recently about something like that, right? So we're doing a program that's looking at police brutality. Is there interest in the Black community? None. Then we're doing a program looking at suicide. Suicide rates are increasing in the Black community, right?
Yes.
It is. And where we used to have the lowest numbers, right? All of a sudden it's on the rise, right? So we're doing a program again about that, right? Still little traction. We're also doing a program that's looking at, you know, steps, right? Step show type thing. So guess what? All of a sudden, everybody, they're asking, when is it? How is there a cost to it? So all those things are paramount, right? Those kind of entertainment type things. But when we talk about like rolling our sleeves and addressing police brutality or examining suicide rates, and we're going to be doing one about voting, right? Because what's going on in the state, we get little interest in that, and I believe it's because people feel, you know, that there is, you know, why are we fighting this? Because we can't create change, and that creates low group efficacy, which is a problem.
Mm-hmm. And that just furthers my frustration. And when I say this, I'm not generalizing this to all Black people, but in 2023, when we're continuously losing rights, somebody's talking about erasing our history at this point. We still have to encourage people to get out there and vote. I'm trying to rationalize that. During the midterm elections, one of the lowest turnouts that we've had, you know, in voting history, and yet we still talk about what people are doing to us, not understanding that we have the power to change these things if we can just come together collectively. Here are some things that frustrate me. We'll pay whatever the cost is to go to a Beyonce concert, but we won't pay the cost to enroll in school. We will throw the most elaborate baby shower for baby 1, 2, and 3, but there is no investing in our retirement fund. We tend to sow into those things that will give us guilty pleasure, but does nothing for us intrinsically or systemically to invoke the change we need that creates a generational change, generational difference, generational wealth for our children. But we tend to do those things that gives us that brief moment of fun and laughter, but just not invoking systemic change. Am I lost on that? Am I far off?
No, not at all. But that's part of it, right? That we've gotten to the point where we're just living day by day, right? That we have accepted all the things that society has said about us, that has put on us, and the conditions that we're in, and we just accept it and we pray about it and then live day by day. And so what we have to do is we have to keep reminding, every day if we have to, in some way, some form of fashion, that, listen, we're at the point where there are going to be more minorities than whites. Your vote is going to count even more now. We are not in that day where you can vote and things still stay the same. We do have the power now. See, that's the whole thing. We got into that point where we quote unquote say whites gonna do what they want to do anyway, right? And we feel hopeless that we're not gonna be able to do anything about it, right? But if we keep reminding, particularly our young people, that they are going to be our young blacks and our young Latinos, and keep constantly reminding them that, hey, there are going to be more of you than them. You will have the power. We understand that that we have in the past believed that we couldn't do things because we were so far outnumbered. And that being so far outnumbered was the reason all of these things keep happening to us. Well, that's about to change. And you have to start changing it now. So we have to constantly, the same way politicians hit us with the same ads and the same slogans and the same this, that, and the other, and the same way even in materialistic things, you see the same posters for the same Beyonce concert, 50 posters on one block, because they're constantly telling you about that concert, right? That same marketing skill has to be applied for us socially as well. We have to keep letting our young people know and let people know as a whole that this is a momentous change that we got to be prepared for, and we got to start working on right now. We got to start getting out. We got to start voting, because the more we vote, the more we get into that habit, the more we participate in the social and political and economic things, not just economic contributors, but actually as our own economic viability is concerned, we begin to set those things in motion so that when the time does come, we are fully prepared and we are in the position that we need to be in. It's the same thing. We have to keep hitting our people over the head with the same notion. Listen, there is about to be a momentous change. There is about to be more of us than them, plain and simple. We have to let our parents know that right now, particularly again, as Dr. White has said, in our schools, it is more of our children than their children. So we need to start saying more about how they are being educated, because it is more of us than them. We need to start doing things to let our young black people, when I say young black, I'm talking about now in the late teens, early 20s, start letting them know, if you are thinking about teaching, here's the things you need to understand. Here are the things that we have to have that are going to give us those cultural reinforcements that we need to build as a community. And we need you there. We need black males to go into teaching. We need you there. And so we have to explain to them, here's why. Because there are more Black and Latino students in our schools, and there are going to be more of us than them. So we need to start working now and not be reactive 20 years from now when it's too late.
Powerful.
I think that and I agree with Dr. Dixon, but I think that if we're going to rely on schools, that's not going to work, because that's going to fall into the system of inequality where that's not even going to happen, because that's the schools. There's 13 social institutions. All of them are rigged to reinforce the racial status quo. That's just about it. What I think that we need to do is to go into our communities is what we need to do. And do some roll up our sleeves and do some work within the communities, get into the families and things like that. And that's hard, right? Because I'm not, if I can be honest, as a sociologist, I'm not hopeful at all. I'll lay this out, because there's so much rolling against us, that to get up that hill, it's not going to be easy. First of all, look at the proclivities of 18 to 24-year-olds, right? We already know historically that's a block that's there, but they don't vote. The only time they voted really was when Obama was in office, and he was a cult of personality. Then you've got to get Black folks to vote. We don't vote. The only time we voted was when Obama was in office, because we had representation. We saw hope with him, right? What happened right after that? We just checked out. Well, that's how it works. You know what I mean? I think we have to go into the communities. And I think that, and I don't see wide change. I see incremental change that can get us to a point. It's not going to be in my lifetime, right? But it has to start somewhere. It's like building intergenerational wealth, right? I'm not going to see it in my lifetime. 2 generations up, my grandkids will probably see from the work that we've done, right? Because it's an incremental process. There's so much conditioning of what's been done onto us. That learned helplessness, it's real, but it has to start somewhere. And I think that it starts within the communities. We can't start with these social institutions, right? Because look, let's just be real about this, right? It is the will of society to keep racism intact. Because if it was the will of society not to, we would have squared this away decades ago, right? Decades ago. And when you think about it, African Americans are actually doing worse now than we were in the pre-civil rights era, right? Give that some good thought. Statistically, we are. And I always say integration was like one of the worst things that could ever happen to us, because I believe that we would have been thriving if we were left to our own, right? Integration, it brings into play, we pick up the values of our oppressors, right? So now we want to buy these expensive cars and stuff like that. We had businesses before integration in our communities. Think about Black Wall Street, right? Things like that. And I think that that would have gained more momentum. We came into them. They picked us up, brought them into our world, and it became punitive to us because we started picking up the values of our oppressors. And it's a weird, bizarre concept, but if you think about it.
So I dare not leave here, because I think you both have alluded to this conversation. You take the regular Joe in the poorest part of our communities. All of us are from different communities: Daytona Beach, the greater Orlando area, Palm Coast. You take the average Joe in those communities who feels that sense of victimization. How do we get him? How do we change his mindset, or not even change his mindset, even get him to thinking differently? For those people that are listening, how do we get our people from the victimization standpoint to a sense of hopefulness? Any thoughts on that?
It's a conversation, and it's a long, as Brother Mawat said, it's a long and intricate conversation. Now, while I will agree about what he said about integration being not the best thing to happen, but I also remember that when we had our own, every time they get jealous, they firebomb it. So it's like every time that we were doing too well, they blow it up. Look at Ocoee, the Ocoee massacre, Rosewood, Black Wall Street. That was the first time the airplanes were used domestically to firebomb a city. So like you said about racism being ingrained, it's damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Think about it. They're still blowing up our neighborhoods. Nothing's changed.
No. Right. Like Move and 84. No, I agree. I think that because somebody brought that up, and it was an interesting point. Even though we still clustered in neighborhoods, there's it seems that more of us are moving into other places now, so it's kind of harder to do it when it was 90% clustered in one area. So you have people that are living in mixed neighborhoods, or you know, and those things that are going on as well. I think that and even though we've taken up a lot of the bad habits of the oppressor, right? But I do think that in many cases, especially is it Generation Alpha? They keep changing names on me, but they have more exposure face to face in with other people, whereas 60 years ago that wasn't the thing, unless you live in a small community. So that's a good part where you have at least the conversation. But yeah, there are issues, and it's going to be incremental. But I think that not only because I think that we're thinking about, and rightfully so, we're thinking about the Black community, but this whole country has to have a seismic shift, because where we are now, I mean, none of that is going to work unless, as you alluded to earlier, that there's a shift in mentality. Because until we get to the point, and it's going to come, because end stage capitalism, as it is, as I see it, is not. It's the end of the empire, right? It's not. Something's got to give. Something's got to give. Banks are failing again. It's like 1890 all over again, right? So what do we do? And I think in many ways, at least there is a cadre of people. How about that? There's a cadre of people that have the wherewithal to reach out. But I think that we have to, if you have that knowledge, you have to be able to address those people that maybe have that learned helplessness and not come in as, high and mighty. It's kind of like that, going back to Du Bois and double consciousness, right? You're in two worlds, especially if you're in academia or business or whatever else. It's still two worlds, and you have to, you have to delve with it, and you have to create and hopefully get more people in there. You have to take one and in the spirit of Sankofa, reach back and bring somebody else with you, or several people if you can. And even if, to go back to what you said about education, you have to use their weapons against it. So if it's all about school choice now, it may be time to open up our own schools yet again. Because if it's school choice, because that's what it is, school choice. See? And all the laws don't affect private schools. They're public institutions.
So I just have to chime in. Yeah, we open up our own schools, right? I have the most unpopular thought here, and I bring this as a sociologist. Integration was horrible, right? And so I'm going to give a couple of examples, right? There are communities right now in Orlando, right? Black communities that are perceived as being dangerous. But you know what? They're thriving because you've got Black people in that community setting up businesses, setting up their own schools and things like that, and they're thriving. So now how do we go from group efficacy, right? So now the people are seeing representation in that community, right? So they're not leaving. So what was perceived as a poor community is actually doing well. Where I came from, right? We were a segregated community, right? But we had good outcomes because we stayed segregated. As a matter of fact, the neighborhood grew because of white flight. Blacks started moving in there, and then white people left because it was a white community. And so the Black community became a cohesive. And it literally was taking a village to raise it. So all the parents knew the kids and things like that, and we had good outcomes. Then I point to the Hispanic community. Boy, they are doing some fantastic things, segregating themselves in these enclaves, building up businesses for themselves. White folks ain't going there bothering them. No, they're doing all of this, creating opportunities for themselves. So when we got pulled out of our communities, right, I believe that would have been our trajectory, that we would have still been, we would, it's hard to think about that without thinking about Wakanda, right? I mean, let's take it to another level. But we're great. We are great, and we are resilient. And we have the fortitude to move forward if we were not integrated and developed, or where internalized racism, internalized oppression kicked in. And then, we started adopting the values of our oppressors. That's the absolute worst thing that still is happening in our community that is failing us.
And we see it
that's the thing.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, that's the thing about it, right? We're at the point now where we recognize the failures, right, of integration, right? That we rushed it and we weren't prepared, but they made the decision because they thought that we couldn't sacrifice another generation. So the hard decision was made for integration. We're in it now. We're where we are. The thing about it is, you're right in the point where I say all the time, the revolution has to be internal, right? That we have to, if we do have to get our own schools, we get our own schools. If we do have to do things internally, we do. We have to change the mindset internally, right? We have to begin to move our people into that idea, right? Because we're almost at that point where we can merge the two, and it is. You are exactly right, Dr. Mawar. It is going to be probably one of our rather greatest challenges because of the position that we are in now. But it will be something that we're going to have to face. We have to face the idea that we have to take those two mentalities and push them forward. We have to begin to look at each other and look at our community in a segregated thought. But at the same time, we have to realize that we will be at the best position that we ever have been in about 30 years, when there are more minorities than whites. So this internal revolution, so to speak, has to start taking place now. We can't be reactionary. We have to be actionary now. So if it means that we have to segregate ourselves, like you said, and do these things because we are in such a predicament right now, then we need to do that. I am all for that. We should segregate ourselves, so to speak, definitely economically. We need to put our dollars back into it. We need to get our dollars out of that materialistic realm. I saw a very sad, to me, it was a sad little clip on Facebook where this couple was arguing. I guess he was famous. I didn't recognize him because I don't really keep up with the newest rappers and the newest, people, these, what they call the social people, the influencers. But obviously they had a nice income, because she's arguing with him why she wants $250,000 wedding. And he's telling her he's not going to pay for $250,000 wedding. And she is going on and on about why she needs her $250,000 wedding. And so we got to start internally, like you said, Mawar, we have to look at ourselves internally and start making those changes, because then we can prepare for the fact that there will be more of us, so they can't just drop a bomb on our Black communities that are private. They can't just run to Congress and redistrict the lines to give them more power. They can't do all of these things because they don't have the numbers anymore. But if we continue to just buy into their mentality, which is a social problem, as you could expand on more because you're the sociologist here, the more we are in this country, the more we are becoming more like them. And we got to break that cycle, and it's going to have to be internal.
Okay, so that's the point, right? First of all, let's talk about the $250,000 wedding. That's internalized racism, internalized oppression. That is the value of the oppressor, where they're thinking about doing, what is a $250,000 wedding, right? So that's what I'm talking about, that integration. Also, this whole majority becoming the minority becoming the majority, that's a utopian folly. Because at the end of the day, dominant ideology is going to be one that's going to be pervasive. We will never lose that that ratio, or that where white values are dominant. So we can have the largest numbers, right? Women outnumber men, but at the end of the day, it's a patriarchal society, right? And the other thing that we really have to remember is that integration was never about us. It was about white people, right? Again, the system of racism, right? It was never for the betterment of us. It was for us to assimilate into white culture, right? Adopt their style. I mean, adopt their values. Hopefully reduce crime, because now we'll be good Black people. That's all that was about. It wasn't about for to improve the life chances of Black people. It was all for white people. So they moved us into their world, and now look at what we do, right? We self-segregate. So now we move into their white neighborhoods. We do well, right, in our world, and then we want to move into their world, right? Instead of staying in our communities and building up into our communities. And that's, I think, is the key. We need to stay in our communities, bring our wealth, our knowledge, our advancements into those communities. And that's what I'm seeing in the Black communities in Orlando. And the thing about it, though, is that, so here's that weird transaction that works. So white folks don't want to go in there because they think it's dangerous. It's not dangerous, it's just Black, right? So they're able to thrive in those communities because there's no white involvement, right? So they're doing their thing, just like the Hispanic communities, right, down here. White folks don't want to go in there, right? So they're doing their things and building commerce in their communities, leaving them alone.
You know, Luis, one of my former coworkers, part of the Hispanic community, he pointed out that part of the problem too is that the victimization is taught at home to children. So it's just like some type of indoctrination. Awareness must start at the nucleus of the family homes. That, you know, this victimization is ingrained within the dynamics of our family, and could it possibly be passed down from generation to generation?
It's modeled behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what they learn.
It's true. It's what's learned, what you see. But we have so many success stories. I mean, as I tell my students every semester, I'm like, at the most, you're 4 generations away from being on a farm. I said, unless you're in a very unique situation, you're 4 generations away. And they were like, no, I'm from so-and-so. And I said, okay, so where's grandma from? Or Alabama or Mississippi or whatever else, or the ones that come in from out of the country. And I'm like, look, I know, you know, it's the same thing. So you have to deal with that, and you have to make them understand that. Now, the funny thing, and I wanted to piggyback on what Brother Moat said about integration, and it was about white people and not us. It was about sports. That the civil rights movement didn't gain any real traction, in my opinion, until Alabama lost to USC. That did more. When they saw integrated team beat that, they were like, you know what? And that's the whole thing. So even it's going back to the irony of it, right? So you have schools like even USC, where if you take all the athletes out, they don't even have any Black students. They're all athletes, and then if not, and they're right in Compton, right? Aren't they right there? And you take that away, there's no Black students. So we're in that situation where, what do we have to do? We went from having HBCUs, which still produce 50% of all the PhDs, but only have, what was the number? It was either 7 or 16% of the black students go to HBCUs now, which in and of itself is terrifying. And that's part of the problem, and that's the economics. That's the economic side of it as well. And what do we do? And how do we deal with that? And you have, depending on where you are, you have little enclaves, little societies, and they tend to find themselves. So I think Dr. Moore and myself have another layer, because we're both because Mark, you were born here? No,
I was born in Jamaica.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. So we have that same thing, and then there's a double. So it's that immigrant experience, and then the Black immigrant experience, and then having Black friends, and then it's a whole bunch of issues, and the understanding that even if you have a Black space, because I talk to my relatives, all that, everybody that's from Jamaica. Jamaica is 81% Black, but they have that similar, and that's what Dr. Moore was talking about. It's still patriarchal. It's still run like a colony in many respects, and it shouldn't be. And when you even look at the way that it's set up and how it was set up, that's the same thing that happens in America, because it's the same system. It's the same system. The apple does not fall far from the tree. So you still have that issue. And then you have what we haven't addressed is the ones that we have the ones that say it's helplessness. I'm just going to stay. I'm not going to do anything. And then you have the ones that say, you know what? Even though I have this melanin content, I'm not a part of y'all. I'm going to do me. And so now I am the gatekeeper's gatekeeper, and I can't stand none of y'all. And if I have it in my power to do anything, I'm still not going to do anything.
That's internalized oppression, by the way.
Right. Because you're not worthy. Because you didn't do X, Y, or Z. So
that has been imposed on us. That's white thinking, right? Bootstrap ideology. And that's what I'm taking. These are the things that destroy us in our communities because we embrace their values. That was imposed on us, where we start alienating ourselves from, well, why are you down there, right? Well, it's crazy. It's a transaction, and it's an automatic transaction.
So even within our communities, we experience it where one makes it out, and the hope would be is that you go back and help your brother and your sister, but instead we start looking down on each other and say, why aren't you taking advantage of the same opportunity that I'm taking advantage of? And if you look at it, all of us, have credentials behind our name. We were able to do something. What'd you say, Dr. Dixon?
You're on mute.
It's that idea of rugged individualism, right? Which is at the core of the white community and the white culture, that rugged individualism. And as we are in this country, the more we develop that culture. And so when we do make it out, instead of looking back like we were once expected to do and things of that nature, we see that they adopt into that rugged individual culture and say, I made it out, why can't you? And it's funny you said that, Dr. White, is because we see the same thing when we look at the history of Africa, right? During colonization, there were a few blacks who were actually going out of the nation area and going into the city, and they were getting jobs and things of that nature. And in the beginning, they were sending money back. They were paying tribute to the chiefs. They were doing all of these things. But in time, they started not coming back. They started keeping the money to themselves and things of that nature because they began to adopt the ideas of that rugged individualism, right? And it's funny, it's the grassroots that really were holding on to those ideas. But now we've gotten to the point where our grassroots, even our grassroots, have caught hold to those ideas of materialism so much because they lack what they see as their own self-worth. And so they find in their own self-worth in these materialistic things. And so we have to, again, go back to getting them to internalize things and have this internal revolution, because you are absolutely correct, Dr. Mawat. We can be in the majority and still have the minorities, ideologies, and culture permeating our own communities and society. And so we just have to begin to get those notions back. We have to get those notions that we used to foster during segregation because we didn't have a choice. We have to get those notions back into our community.
I think that's more systemic
we have
than
to
you
hit
think.
each other over the head over and over with those notions, because We have to keep playing the same records, the same way that the ideologies were played on us.
I think that's more systemic than you think, because when you talk about not coming back to help your community, your brothers and your sisters, if you think about the generations today graduate school, maybe go away to college to earn academic degrees or find their level up. They move away, never even return back home, never even keep contact, it becomes them. They create a new life, a new world. So we're seeing that play out, but probably in a way where we're probably more disconnected than we've ever been, because we do move away and hardly ever look back, especially when we quote unquote make it out.
Mhm.
You think about it, as I was, saying that all of us have credentials by our name, or a title in front of our name here with doctor. To society, we've reached the pinnacle of earning the top education in our country. We're expected to go back and help our communities and use that education and that influence to help our communities come up. But how many people actually do that? Because it then becomes a me mentality and what I can get and how I can live my best life.
So again, I think that goes back to um, there are a lot of PhDs, black PhDs that get that for the doctor status, right? And to me, that is an internalized depression, right?
Mhm.
That's why I'm saying this whole integration thing, right? When we start picking up those values and things like that, right? Yeah, but there are some of us that are actually going into this work. I think all four of us are in the community doing work and using these degrees for what they, I believe, are intended to do. But you have so many people that are getting them just so they can say that they're doctor this and doctor that. And to me, that is systemic racism in play. It's just called internalized racism. And now we use that to leverage status among our black folks, brethren, right? So now we are status above them in our own group. It's craziness, right? I
Mhm.
do want to share this though, that I remember we need allies, right? I was in marketing back then, and Eric Kovar, he is a developer in Winter Park. And so Eric had an experience. He went to Florida, Gainesville, Florida, University of Florida. He had a black roommate, right? So he internalized racism because he saw the way how his black roommate was being treated. And he said that, you know what? He's going to help people in the black community. So I worked on this campaign, and he took me on a tour on his property as a developer in Winter Park, right? So Winter Park is an exclusive area. And he said, you know what? I'm going to get a group of you and we're going to invest in property. He's going to help us. We were all black and invest in property. Guess where? In Winter Park, right? So he was going to get us property where it was not, but and given to the community now, right? It was split commercial and residential property. So commercial at the bottom, residential at the top. They have a lot of those in New York, right? So he wanted to develop those, give us opportunity to bring opportunity and business into the community. Well, guess what? We were signing papers and it was shot down by the community, not the black community, right? And we're talking about in that Winter Park really is a railroad that runs right down. They say the railroad track. It was right on a railroad track. So we were going to build opportunity within the black community. They didn't even want that. So I guess I say all of this is that allies would be nice too, because we can't always do it all by ourselves, right? We even saw that in the civil rights movement of '63 and '68, right? So we got allies that would be great.
Wow, that's big there. So
Yeah.
we've reached our time. Of course, we can keep going about this on, and I want to give each other panelists an opportunity to have some final comments and wrap it up. And so, Dr. White, we'll come to you first.
I think that we have a lot of work to do, and a lot of it is past this prologue. What are we going to do? And how are we going to do? We're going to have to. We're going to have to be within our own communities. We're going to have to develop ways of keeping our money within our communities. And we're going to have to make these younger folks understand that there's no rush, because I think that's another thing. Even on the campus, there's no rush to go out in the real world. I mean, there are situations where they have to go away and can't go back. I understand that, but there's people. I'm gonna get this. I'm gonna get an apartment. I'm like, they're raising apartments so high. Go home, get some money, save it up, help your parents out. That's what we used to do. There's, take time and put yourself in a same situation instead of running up debt and getting nice cars and doing all this other stuff. Because, if it floats, flies, or rolls, it depreciates. And so I think that we just need to get those skills and talk to them on their level. And that would be a affirmative step in the right direction.
Awesome. Dr. Dixon.
I think that we're at a point, because so much information is out there and we've been able to do so much with this information. I don't think we're doing enough with it, but we're doing more than ever. We do have to recognize that integration did hurt us. It did hurt us, but we're in it now. And we have to start being proactive into how we're going to change these things. We have to start developing our say-so about our own culture, because the outside influence, white American culture, has permeated our culture so much that it's to the point where it's dictating, with the music, with these ideas of materialism and everything else. And so we must have a revolution within our community that is internal. And if that revolution says that we must begin to segregate ourselves more, then so be it. Because we have to get to a point where we aren't considering ourselves victims anymore, but we are proactive people that are moving forward with the ideas of other people, not just our family, but other people that share our culture, moving forward as well. And I think it starts with the notion of doing some segregated things, going back to the ideas where the church did more than just preached on Sunday. It did more than just hand out clothes. There was a time when the NAACP and other organizations like that would have a solid relationship with the Black churches. There was a time when the NAACP would hand out pamphlets that actually told you who was the best person to vote for and why you shouldn't vote for this other person, right? And so all of these things we have to start doing internally, because to change the mentality that we have has to be a consistent, repetitive motion that we have to keep hitting each other over the head. We have to get to a point where our young people are disgusted and upset by watching these videos of us fighting all the time. We have to get to a point where the internal struggle is recognized by us all, and we have to understand how much of the white American culture is influencing us. And so it's our job, it's our responsibility to teach our own history. It's our responsibility to say, hey, it's okay to go get help. That therapy is not bad, that therapy actually helps you and the whole community. And we also have to start seeing, right, that we must begin to prepare for the future and stop living day by day.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Mowatt.
Well, first I want to say thank you, Dr. Brother Wilson, for bringing these forums together, because it really does. I think if just one mind changes the influence by it, then your work is done. Our work is done collectively, because it is incremental change. So I think that Black folks, that we need to know that we are resilient. We are the most resilient group on the planet, right? And that sometimes is not understood, and that's where or forgotten, or just wiped away because of that integration, like I said, right? That learned internalized oppression. But I think that we need to have people within our community that can be representation of resilience. And I try to bring that in the community. And how I do it is that I do these engagements and programs and things like that. And you cast this net. There's only going to be about 3 or 4 people that get it. You can do a whole crowd of like 50 people, but you identify those people and you see them. They're the ones that ask questions. You bring them into your fold. It's not even work, because they want to be in your fold. And then you work with them in the community. So now the community is seeing authentic representation of what can happen. And representation is everything. So you build it like that. Each speaking engagement, everything you do, you find those people that are really interested and then bring them into your world. And then you create representation. And that's how the community can overcome this victimization thing, because they see that they can, because they're seeing representation of that. So I thank you for giving us this forum, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you. I thank you, brothers. My closing remarks would be is that I do believe that there are situations that place us in the mindset of being victims. But I also believe that we have an opportunity to overcome some of those things. There's going to always be the situational circumstances, but I think that collectively as a body, we can come together and work to overcome some of those situations that at least gives us an opportunity to live a well-lived life. We're not going to be able to change the world. And I think all of you said it collectively, a lot of changes we won't even see in our lifetime, but we can leave our imprint by helping our brothers and our sisters to understand their circumstances, but most importantly, move beyond their circumstances. You don't have to be a victim of where you live, where you work, what you go through. You can overcome those things in order to have a well-lived life. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to change everything around you. And I really want to underscore that, which shouldn't be the focal point, but it should be, how do we move our communities forward so that we don't find ourselves in the same situation tomorrow, next month, or even next year? So I thank everyone who logged on to listen. I thank all of my friends, my brothers here for joining me in this important conversation, and there will be more to come. So please don't forget, check us out on the podcast, Dr. Wilson Speaks. You can follow us on drwilsonspeaks.com. And again, I thank you, brothers. I couldn't do it without you. So until next time, take care.